Welcome to this information video for NUI Galway students who will be going abroad to study under the Erasmus program in autumn 2022. This is the first of two videos from the International Affairs Office, and it will give you a general introduction to the Erasmus program, as well as providing you with some guidance for completing the online grant application form, applying to your host university for admission as an Erasmus student, and completing your learning agreement. Other topics covered in this video include the OLS language assessment, organizing insurance for your Erasmus visit, completing your Erasmus grant agreement, and some general tips and advice for your Erasmus preparations. I'll start by introducing you to the staff in the International Office who deal with our outbound Erasmus program. My name is Jody Blumenfeld, and I'm the person at the end of the Outgoing Erasmus at nuigalway.ie email address. I will be your first point of contact for Erasmus paperwork, grant payments, and general queries. My colleague, Mary Lyons, is the Institutional Erasmus Coordinator, meaning that Mary manages mobility of our outgoing and incoming Erasmus students, as well as staff mobility and our Erasmus partnerships with universities abroad. The best way to contact us is using the Outgoing Erasmus email address. We also have a website that I'd encourage you to visit because it contains a lot of useful information, as well as copies of almost all the documents you'll require. Erasmus is an acronym for European Community Action Scheme for the mobility of university students, and it's been in existence since 1987. In the 34 years since it began, millions of students have taken part in the Erasmus program, and it's been an important rite of passage for them. Erasmus works on the basis of contracts or agreements between universities to exchange students in particular subject areas. So the idea is that NUI Galway will host a number of students from any one of our partner universities for a semester or a year of study, while sending students to that university in return. Erasmus students don't pay any tuition fee to the host university abroad, but they must continue to pay their normal fee to their own home university. In other words, in August, you must make sure to register at NUI Galway and pay any fee that you would normally pay in order to be registered here. This ensures that you can receive credit for your period of study abroad in the framework of your degree program here at NUI Galway. Central to your study period abroad is a very important document called your learning agreement. This sets out a list of the courses that you will take while abroad, and it requires the signatures of your academic coordinators here in Galway and at your host university abroad before you begin your Erasmus study visit. This prior approval of the courses you'll take while abroad guarantees that once you pass those courses, you will get full academic recognition from NUI Galway for your Erasmus study period. And last but not least, most students participating in the Erasmus program will receive a mobility grant. And this Erasmus grant will not cover all of the costs of moving and living abroad, and nor is it intended to, but it will certainly help you with those costs. I'll return to the subject of the grant later. For now, I want to bring your attention to two important documents. The first is the information handbook, which you can download from our website, and the second is the online form that you will use to apply for the Erasmus grant. We will send the link to the online form to all students who have been nominated to study at a university in Europe or the UK for either semester 1 or the full academic year. We will deal with semester 2 applications later in the year. Please note that the strict deadline for semester 1 and full year applications is midnight on Wednesday, the 11th of May. At that time, the form will close and no further semester 1 or full year applications will be possible. Here's what the handbook looks like, and I would encourage you all to read it. Very often, students come to us with questions that have in fact been answered in the handbook. I'm going to talk to you a little about the application form, and some of what I'm going to say might sound very basic, but I want to make the process as easy as possible for you, and I also want to help you avoid errors that students have made in the past, which caused problems for them and us, so please bear with me. Before you begin filling in the form, I think it will be helpful if I outline the purpose of it, because you are required to tick a box at the end to confirm that you understand NUI Galway's data protection policy and that you consent to the use of your data. So the information that we capture in this application form will be used to create a database of outgoing Erasmus students to which Mary and I have access. Every single question in the form is there for a specific purpose, and every single answer that you provide is important in ensuring the accuracy of our database. This will be very important for things like the processing of your Erasmus grant payment and for issuing customized letters to individual students, as well as feeding into an EU database of all Erasmus students all over Europe. The storage and use of information held in the EU database is regulated by EU privacy laws. You will be asked to provide the name and contact details of your next of kin, and obviously, this information would need to be shared with other NUI Galway staff in case of emergencies or crisis situations. Here's what the application form looks like. As you can see, it's quite straightforward, but please set aside 10 minutes or so to fill it in with care and attention, double checking everything before you hit the submit button. Also, it's very important that you access the link to the form via your NUI Galway Office 365 account. The link will be sent to your NUI Galway email address, and the form will only accept responses from NUI Galway Office 365 accounts. So please only click on the link in your email and don't share it with others. There are about 30 questions, and most are very straightforward. But before you begin, please make sure you have two pieces of information to hand. The first is your bank details, which we will need in order to make your Erasmus grant payment. You'll find them at the top of your bank statement. We'll require your sort code and 8-digit bank account number. The sort code is a 6-digit number that identifies the bank branch where your account is held. Many Irish sort codes begin with the number 9. Sometimes sort codes are written in pairs of digits with spaces or hyphens in between, but on this form, please write your sort code as one continuous 6-digit number with no spaces. It's important to remember that while you may notice that your sort code appears on your debit card, the 8-digit number beside it is the card number and it's not your bank account number. You should look for your bank account number on your bank statement, and please write it in the application form without any spaces between digits. If your bank account is not held in the Republic of Ireland, then you will need to give us your BIC number and IBAN in place of the sort code and account number. These are simply the internationally recognized format of the sort code and account number, respectively. You will also need to provide the start and finish dates of the semester or year that you'll spend at your host university. They may have already sent you these in an information sheet, or you might have to consult the academic calendar that you can find on your host university's website. I mentioned before that we will use the information you provide to create our database, and you'll help us enormously if you take the time to ensure that you've written each response accurately and with attention to detail. It goes without saying that errors in bank account details are going to cause problems and significant delays in grant payments. But even apparently small details like incorrectly written names and addresses take time to rectify, and these details are important. We will use our database to generate a formal personalized nomination letter for each one of you, showing your name, address, date of birth, and confirming your status as a nominated Erasmus student from NUI Galway. You might have to produce this letter for Susie, or present it to your host university, or to some administrative authorities in your host country. It's important that the letter contains accurate information and that it looks professional. So please ensure that your name and address are written correctly, with each word starting with a capital letter. For your address, you have up to 4 lines available in the form, so use as many as you need. Remember that if you live in Galway or Limerick City, for instance, you don't need to write Galway, County Galway, or Limerick, County Limerick. But if you live in Athenry or Ennis, for example, you should write Athenry, County Galway, or Ennis, County Clare, making sure to include the word county. For some of you, all of this will be very obvious, but we see many examples of carelessly completed forms, and as I said, not having to spend a lot of time amending student information will leave us more time for other tasks like supporting students and dealing with their queries. When you're completing the form, it's advisable to use the form of your name that appears on your passport. One first name is sufficient unless you normally use two. Some students occasionally use the Irish version of their name. I would advise you to choose one and stick to it for all of your paperwork. The home address you give should be your permanent home address, and when you're selecting dates using the calendar, please make sure that the year is correct. You will be asked to insert two email addresses, your NUI Galway one and a private one, purely so that we have an alternative email address for you in case there's ever an issue with your NUI Galway email account. I would emphasize, however, that we will normally communicate with you through your NUI Galway email address, and this is the one you should always use for corresponding with us. Emails sent from Hotmail and Gmail accounts can end up in our spam folders, and we may not notice them straight away. I should also mention that when we say alternative email address, we mean an alternative email address for you, not for your parents. It's our policy to regard students going on Erasmus as adults, and we will not be communicating with your parents unless it becomes essential due to some emergency situation. In general, where a parent contacts us to ask questions about their son or daughter's Erasmus, we would be obliged to obtain the student's written permission before discussing them with the parent. Erasmus grant payments will be made by electronic bank transfer, and so it's very important that you double check your bank details before you submit the form. And if you happen to have more than one bank account, please make sure that the details you've given us are for the account into which you wish your Erasmus grant to be paid. Also, please make sure that you haven't confused the sort codes and account numbers of two different accounts. The deadline for submission of the grant application form is midnight on the 11th of May. When you submit your application form, you will immediately receive an email like the one shown here, confirming receipt of your application and providing you with some further information. You'll see that the email doesn't come from an NUI Galway email address, but rather from Microsoft Power Apps and Power Automate. You'll notice that at the bottom of the email, you'll find a full list of all the responses you provided for the questions in the form. Please review these carefully to make sure that there are no errors, and should you discover a mistake, please don't submit the form again, but instead contact us at the NUI Galway Outgoing Erasmus email address. What happens if you miss the grant application deadline? Well, in that case, unfortunately, you can't be considered for an Erasmus grant. You may be approved to study abroad as a zero grant Erasmus student, and that would mean that you will enjoy some of the privileges of the Erasmus program, such as not having to pay tuition fees to the host university and getting full recognition for your study abroad, but you will not be eligible for an Erasmus grant. I must emphasize that where the Erasmus grant is concerned, a deadline really does mean a deadline. This is always the case, but particularly so this year with so many students due to go on Erasmus. I need to remind you that an Erasmus grant is not an automatic right or entitlement, but a privilege, and in some countries it's regarded as a scholarship for which students must compete. We will begin processing the student data immediately after the deadline, and we will be unable to accept any late applications. I would suggest that you complete the form as soon as possible and don't leave it too close to the deadline, allowing for unforeseen problems like bad Wi-Fi. If you're a language student who has applied for a teaching assistantship, you'll most likely have been assigned an Erasmus study visit place at a host university abroad, and you should apply for a study visit grant just in case, while you await the outcome of your teaching assistantship application. If that application is successful, you can proceed to avail of an Erasmus traineeship grant, withdrawing your study visit grant application and completing a separate grant application form for an Erasmus traineeship. The deadline for that is mid-July. You won't be attending a university abroad, so you won't be able to pursue courses in your second subject. So you must inform your second subject department that you're going on an Erasmus traineeship and organize to complete work in that subject to make up the required credits. The other Erasmus paperwork is broadly similar, but do read the information on our Erasmus traineeship website. As well as applying for the Erasmus Mobility Grant, you'll need to make an application to your host university for admission there as an Erasmus student. You must make sure to check the deadline and adhere to it. Your academic coordinator here in Galway will have nominated you to your host university, and so you can expect to receive an email from that university advising you of their application procedures. Now, students sometimes miss important emails that end up in their spam or junk folders, and this can happen, for instance, with the very first communication from their host university, even if it's sent to their NUI Galway email address, because the server here might identify the unknown sending address as spam. And that's why it's really important to keep a close eye on your spam folder or your junk mail folder. If you're required to provide the Erasmus code of NUI Galway on your application, that's simply IRL Galway 01. If you have the possibility to apply for a room in a university residence, I would encourage you to do so. It's true that accommodation standards in residences can vary, and the level of comfort in some may not be on par with what some of you are used to in Galway, but in general, halls of residence will be of a decent standard, and while you might have to share kitchen facilities with quite a number of other students, the advantages of living in a residence include security, reasonable rent, often with utilities included, and the opportunity to get to know lots of other students. If you're required to provide transcripts with your application, you'll need firstly a statement of your semester one results from each of your departments or disciplines on official headed note paper, and secondly, your official first year transcript, which you can obtain from SID, the Student Information Desk. In terms of the academic preparation that you should be doing now, your host university may require a preliminary learning agreement along with your application, and that's where you would identify the courses that you wish to take. Make sure that you're clear about the ECTS requirements of your particular course here at NUI Galway. Don't wait until you're halfway through your Erasmus year to find this out. If you have any doubts about this, ask your academic coordinator now. Language students, be aware that you will have to do an OLS language assessment before you go abroad on Erasmus. The Learning Agreement is a really important document. It's central to your Erasmus studies. It shows the courses that you'll take while abroad, the ECTS credits you'll obtain from them, and how your studies abroad will be recognized by NUI Galway. You'll need to get sign-off or approval of the Learning Agreement from NUI Galway and from your host university. In the case of NUI Galway, you'll need the approval of your academic coordinator. There's a section of the document called During the Mobility Period, and that's where you can reflect changes to your course choices. This is the learning agreement in its original format. Now, this year we're introducing the online learning agreement and encouraging students to use it if possible. However, the information to be completed is essentially the same, and that's why I've put up the old version here so you can take a look at it and see what kind of details you'll need to provide. The very first section is quite straightforward and involves writing in your name, your email address, and your field of study, as well as giving the details of your academic coordinators both here and at your host university. The second section is very important. This is where you'll list the courses that you intend to take at your host university. You'll need to give the titles of the courses, the course codes, the semester in which the courses are supposed to take place, and the number of ECTS credits attached to each course. Please don't forget to fill in the little section at the very end here, which involves providing a web link to the course catalog at the receiving institution. In other words, where on the host university's website did you find the list of courses? The next section of the learning agreement is Table B, and please don't leave it blank. Table B involves identifying how the courses that you'll take while abroad will fit into the framework of your NUA Galway degree, ensuring that you get recognition for them. In the majority of cases, this will simply involve writing in mobility window and the number of credits that NUI Galway will assign to your year or semester abroad, usually 60 or 30 ECTS as the case may be. You'll also be required to indicate your level of language competence based on the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, where A1 is beginner level and C2 is proficient. There's also a native speaker box if that's applicable, for instance, if you'll be studying abroad through English. You'll need to provide names and contact details for your coordinators here and at the host university, and the document will have to be signed by all three parties. This brief outline is, of course, not a substitute for reading pages 14 to 15 of the Information Handbook, where the learning agreement is dealt with in detail. And as I said, we're keen to encourage the use of the online learning agreement, which is straightforward to complete and pretty easy to sign, and it has the great advantage that you don't need to worry about losing your learning agreement or saving it to a USB stick, which might then get mislaid, or having multiple copies of the document, which can cause confusion. The online learning agreement, once created, is available for you to access from anywhere and on any device using your NUA Galway campus account credentials. Your academic coordinator should be able to provide you with instructions for creating your online learning agreement account and completing your online learning agreement. Alternatively, you may contact our office for these. Some of our partner universities are not yet equipped to manage the online learning agreement, and so you'll find a link on our website to the old version should you need to use this. Students sometimes aren't sure who at NUI Galway is to sign their learning agreement. In most cases, it's your main academic coordinator, and you'll find a list of all subject coordinators and their contact details at the back of the information handbook. Only if you're a BA non-language student going to Malta, Uppsala, or Utrecht, send to Mary Lyons and please provide confirmation that the courses you've chosen have been reviewed and approved by both your academic coordinators. If you're a BA student, you must make sure that each of your academic departments or disciplines is aware of and have approved your choice of courses. Don't forget to tell your second subject that you're actually going on Erasmus. Get approval of your courses in writing by means of the learning agreement, which will be signed by your main sending academic department, plus an email from the second subject to confirm that they're happy with your choice of courses. And do make sure that you take sufficient credits for your program of study. Who should sign the learning agreement on behalf of the host university? Well, that will be your academic coordinator there. If you don't know who that is, your academic coordinator here at NUI Galway can help you identify the correct person. And particularly with the online learning agreement, it's crucial that you have the correct name and email address for each coordinator. Online Linguistic Support, or OLS, is a tool developed by the European Commission aimed at helping students to improve their language skills. If you will be actively using French, German, Italian, or Spanish in your studies abroad, then you need to complete an online language assessment before you go on Erasmus. Now, while this is a test of your language skills, you don't need to study for it and you don't need to worry about it. The results will be visible to Mary and to me, but they're not meant to be shared with other parties, and your results cannot be used to prevent you going on Erasmus. The assessment will involve tests of grammar, vocabulary, listening comprehension, and reading comprehension skills, and your results will be expressed in grades according to the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. Generally, B1 is the very minimum level a student should have if going on Erasmus as a language student, and B2 is what most partner universities would expect. If your results are disappointing, it's probably an indication that you need to work on your language skills, but this is where the free online course comes in. After completing the assessment, each student gets access to this course, and it will be a useful preparation for Erasmus, regardless of your language level, so that your language skills don't get rusty over the summer months. The heading on this slide contains a hyperlink to a page where you can find a wealth of information about all aspects of the OLS. Please note that you'll be required to complete a further OLS assessment at the end of your Erasmus studies, and this will hopefully provide evidence of your progress in the language. Another important task as you prepare for Erasmus is to look into travel insurance. The European Health Insurance Card, or EHIC, is the most basic level of cover and a fundamental requirement for any European citizen traveling to another EU state. You can find out more about it and apply for the card at ehic.ie. However, the cover provided by the EHIC will not be sufficient of itself, as it's very limited in its scope, covering only basic care within the public healthcare system. And for that reason, you will also be required to hold a private travel insurance policy. If you or your parents have an existing health insurance policy, you may be wondering if it mightn't meet the requirements, so check what it covers. When going on Erasmus, students must ensure that they're covered for personal accident, medical treatment, repatriation, lost or stolen possessions, and disruption to travel plans. This is what's known in insurance terms as cancellation or curtailment of travel. We cannot choose a policy for you, nor can we advise on the suitability of specific policies. We can give you the names of some insurance providers, but you must make the decision on purchasing a policy that meets your needs. Pay attention to any exclusions or special conditions. For instance, check whether there might be limits on the duration of any single trip or restrictions in relation to making trips home during your Erasmus visit. Above all, please make sure that you read carefully the section of the handbook that deals with insurance. That's Chapter 5, and the information provided at the web link shown here. One of the more enjoyable aspects of preparing for your Erasmus visit is finding out more about your Erasmus destination. It's definitely worthwhile doing some research not only into your host university, but into the town, region, and country where you'll be living. You can use the host university website as a starting point, as well as tourism websites. Your NUI Galway academic coordinator may be able to show you some reports written by former NUI Galway students who were on Erasmus in the same destination that you're going to, or you may have been lucky enough to have connected with students from your Erasmus destination who have been studying here this year. You'll find some hints and tips on the Erasmus app, which you can download, and the website Just Landed. Although it's aimed really at people moving abroad to work, it does have some helpful information for the various countries under the heading of culture, which would be worth taking a look at. Here are just a couple of random links that might be useful for you to look at. The first is a blog, which is nice as a general commentary on Erasmus, in that the author gives quite helpful insights into preparing to go abroad, finding accommodation, managing money, making friends, and generally getting the most out of the experience. He or she, and I'm not sure who the author is, does go into quite a lot of detail about Erasmus paperwork. And to be honest, we would prefer if you would take your advice and guidance from us on that particular aspect of Erasmus, because different universities have different ways of doing things. The second link deals with the elephant in the room, the question that's preoccupying everyone with travel on their mind, and that's the COVID situation around Europe. There's a really useful website called Reopen EU, which gives detailed, up to date information for individual countries, and that's definitely worth consulting. At this point, it seems appropriate to mention COVID-19 and its possible impact on Erasmus study visits. Now, unfortunately, we won't be able to answer all the questions that you'll have at this stage because the overall situation is just so unpredictable. But I must ask you to read carefully the information on page 3 of our handbook for outgoing Erasmus students. That is a list of caveats about taking part in Erasmus during the current global health emergency. Please keep in mind that as well as completing a risk assessment, you will be required to sign a declaration confirming that you understand and accept these conditions and the risks involved, as well as your own responsibilities in this regard. As part of your preparation to go on Erasmus, you should make sure to consult the Department of Foreign Affairs website, where you'll find travel advice by country, not just on the subject of COVID, but also on topics like safety and local laws. It's recommended that Irish citizens traveling or living overseas register their contact details with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. This means that the Irish embassy or consulate closest to your place of residence abroad will be aware of your whereabouts, and you can be contacted and provided with assistance if there's a crisis such as a natural disaster, civil unrest, a terrorist incident, or a family emergency. You should note the contact details of the Irish embassy or consulate in your host country.
If you're not an EU citizen, you might need a visa to go study abroad in your destination country. This could apply to you if you're a UK citizen who only holds a British passport, or it could apply to you if you're an American citizen as well. So, this is something you should investigate online yourself and give yourself plenty of time to do this in advance. Either do a Google search or check with your destination country's embassy in Ireland to see if you do need a visa for your upcoming Erasmus study visit.
Here are some more items for your summer to do list. First of all, as mentioned already, sort out your EHIC and investigate insurance options. Make sure your passport will be valid for the full duration of your Erasmus study visit because if it expires while you're abroad, you'll find it much more complicated to renew it from another country. Set up online banking so you can keep an eye on your account and know when your Erasmus grant arrives. Think about getting an international student identity card, which will give you a reduction on things like travel and entertainment. And finally, you'll get an invitation during the summer to join our Facebook group, NUI Galway Outgoing Erasmus 22-23. And this will be a very useful platform for exchanging information and keeping in touch. After we've processed the grant applications, We will send you some key documents during the summer. These include a letter of nomination from NUI Galway confirming your Erasmus student status, your Erasmus grant agreement, the Erasmus Student Charter setting out your rights and responsibilities as an Erasmus student, the Erasmus timeline explaining key Erasmus procedures, so what needs to be done and when, and a safety advice sheet. Languages students, please note that you're obliged to do an OLS language assessment, and we won't be able to issue you an Erasmus grant agreement until that assessment has been completed. The grant agreement is your 4-page Erasmus contract, setting out the terms and conditions for the award of your Erasmus grant. In the grant agreement, you will be required to insert your personal details and your bank details, as well as the details of the insurance policy that you've purchased. You'll need to sign the grant agreement, date it, and return it to the international office before you leave to go on Erasmus. Please note that by signing the grant agreement, you'll confirm that the insurance policy whose details you've inserted in the grant agreement meets the requirements set out earlier in this presentation. Please note that when going on Erasmus, you must be registered at NUI Galway for the academic year 2022-23. You will register online, and please be sure to do this before you start your studies abroad. Simply go to NUI Galway's registration page and follow the instructions there, making sure that the relevant fee has been paid to NUI Galway. Registration will be made available from late August. If you have a disability, special needs, or a condition that entails additional expenditure for you in order to take part in Erasmus, you may be eligible for an additional Erasmus grant. This grant is intended as support with the particular costs associated with taking part in Erasmus and does not cover ongoing routine medical expenses. Some eligible costs would be special transport or accommodation, or the cost of a personal assistant or assistive technology related specifically to your Erasmus studies. The International Office will provide more information about this during the summer and will invite eligible students to come forward. Outgoing Erasmus students who are registered with the Disability Service should inform the disability officer that they're going to study abroad. It's important to also inform your host university about your disability and your support requirements. You may be wondering about the amount of the Erasmus grant. We haven't yet been informed of the grant rates that will apply in 2022-23, but I can show you the monthly rates for the current year. You'll see that these vary according to different countries. Some countries are regarded as having a higher cost of living, and this is reflected in a higher monthly grant rate. You'll see that this year, students going to Scandinavia or the UK received €350 per month, while a rate of 300 per month applied to all other countries. Grant rates usually increase a little year on year, but we can't guarantee this. While we talk about the Erasmus grant in terms of monthly rates, we don't pay the grant in monthly installments. Instead, we pay the main installment at the beginning of your Erasmus study visit, and that will be about 80% of the estimated total based on the duration of your study visit, with the remainder paid after you've returned home, provided you've completed your study visit satisfactorily and all your Erasmus paperwork is in order. There is an additional grant for financially disadvantaged students, and this is known as SISI, the Social Inclusion Supplementary Support Initiative. And in the current year, this has allowed eligible students to receive €180 per month on top of the regular Erasmus grant. The criteria for SISI are set out by the Higher Education Authority each year and based on a student's particular SUSI status. Please be aware that there are certain conditions attached to the award of the Erasmus grant, and you may have to forfeit your grant and pay it back if you fail to complete the agreed study program, or if you fail to complete a minimum of 3 months abroad. That's 90 days. If you return home without completing the agreed study period, but you have completed the 90 days, you can be asked to return a proportion of the grant. Returning home without completing your international year has implications for your subsequent studies, your final degree, and your fees at NUI Galway. If you fail the international year, it effectively means that you return to year 3 of a 3-year degree program, and as such, you'll have used up your 3 years of free fees and will be liable for a repeat fee, which currently stands at over €1,800. I'll leave you with a final reminder about the Erasmus grant application deadline, which is midnight on Wednesday, the 11th of May. You must get your application in before that date if you wish to receive an Erasmus grant. I hope that you found this presentation useful. We will offer students the opportunity to bring questions to a live Q&A session that we'll offer in the week before the grant deadline. We will also offer a further information video a little closer to your departure date, containing some more practical information about living and studying abroad, as well as an outline of the various pieces of Erasmus paperwork that you'll need to complete during and after your study period abroad. For now, I would like to wish you the very best of luck in your summer exams.